I'm Rachel Billinge. I work in the Conservation Department at the National Gallery. And what I do for the National Gallery is technical examination of paintings. That is, finding out what they were made from, how they were put together, how they've changed over time. And to do that, I have several clever techniques that I can use. The three main techniques that we use are X-radiography, infrared reflectography, and microscope. X-rays have the ability to get all the way through a painting from the back to the front, and it therefore gives us information about everything in the whole structure of the painting. We can find out if they're on wood, what the wood was used, and we can also see if there have been changes in painting. This is the X-ray image that we've made by combining each individual X-ray plate, joining them all together on a computer so we can see the whole painting in one. We can see information about the wooden stretcher that the canvas is stretched over. We can see the little tacks that are holding the canvas on, but we can also see that there are some paint losses, which are the dark parts where paint is missing, and in particular of interest, these straight lines that come down here. These are where paint is missing, where the original panel, which was made from 4 pieces of wood joined together, and the pieces of wood must have broken along the joins, and as they broke, the paint has got lost, and so we see the positions where the joins were as dark lines in the X-ray. I mean, this painting, which is over 500 years old and has undergone the very traumatic experience of having the original wood panel removed from the back and being stuck onto canvas, is still in amazingly good condition. There are a few losses, but really very few losses, and they have been beautifully restored in the last treatment for the painting so that you don't see them when you look at the picture. Infrared uses the opposite end of the electromagnetic spectrum to look through the paint from the front, and the slightly longer wavelengths in infrared allows you to see through colours that are completely solid to the normal eye, and we can see if there's drawing underneath and how the artist has built up his painting. The full infrared reflectogram is allowing us to look through paint that you couldn't see through in normal light, and so if we look here, you can see the sort of dark lines in the infrared, and if I zoom in closer, you start to be able to see the nature of the kind of line, and that tells me that underneath, for example, the Virgin's red drapery, we've got all of this hatching and outlining, and it's all done with black paint and a brush. If we zoom in quite close to the image, we can start to see that these lines have been made with a liquid material. You can even see that the line started at this end and went to this end, and because of the way you apply a paintbrush, you leave more pigment at the end as you're lifting the brush off, so that these lines have got darker blobs at the ends of them. Most of the underdrawing is quite careful, but as he was looking at how the drapery was going to fall onto the floor, he experimented with a few different positions. So we have a part where the Virgin's robe was originally drawn further out over the floor to that point there, and possibly even more easy to see St. Luke, where this curve, this very dark line here is where it's finally painted, and all of these lines beyond that are initial ideas for where the drapery was going to extend onto the floor. This artist has made bigger changes to this picture as well, and most easy to see is in St. Luke's arm and his sleeve. In fact, both hands have moved. Where he is now, he has quite a broad sleeve with a big fur cuff, but what was originally drawn was a much tighter sleeve, or possibly a bare arm, and then a big cuff up above his elbow in this position. The infrared shows underdrawing typical of the kind of drawing that you expect to see in 15th century Netherlandish paintings, but it also shows us that this artist is having to work out the composition as he goes along. He's happy to make changes in the course of painting. He hasn't got something completely fixed and he's mechanically reproducing it. And that's interesting because it does suggest some leadership from a master of a workshop. One other possible change, which is really quite difficult to see, but there's a sort of area around the Virgin's head which is much paler, closer to the Virgin's head and darker outside. And it's possible the Virgin was going to have a huge halo. The microscope is the most fun of all because it allows us to look at the paint itself. We can see pigment particles, how the paint was made, and we can also see how it was applied and what the artist has been doing, what brushstrokes lie over the top of another. This is the microscope pointed directly at one of the Virgin's eyes. Under the microscope we can see that typically for early Netherlandish painting, instead of painting white for the whites of the eye, the artist has mixed blue pigment, and you can see little tiny pieces of blue in here. And this is because he understood that if you just painted white against the pink, it wouldn't look very white. But if you add a little tiny bit of blue in with the white, then the contrast between that and the pink of the flesh tones makes the eye, the white of the eye, look really white. Looking at the surface with the microscope also allows us to see how paint was applied and used, and this shows us that the artist has painted a dark green underpaint, and then while the oil paint was still wet, he's come along with a much lighter green and pressed with his brush into the dark green paint and manipulated the paint and pushed it around. And so some of these strokes are picking up some of the green from underneath and blending the brush strokes together. This is a form of working in oil that we call wet in wet. One of the most fun things in this picture is the little glimpse that the artist has given us into how paintings were made in the 15th century by showing us St. Luke's studio. We have a glimpse through a doorway into a space where he's got an easel. On the easel is a painting that he's in the process of making. But to the side we can see that everything that is prepared for today's painting. He's got a little palette so that he can carry his paint to work on the painting. He's got brushes, and he or one of his junior colleagues has made his paint for working for today, because artists at this time had to make their own paint and they would put it in shells. And what we can see from here, and even more interestingly under the microscope, from the blue tinge to the oval shapes that the colours are in, we can tell that these are mussel shells. Being asked to study these amazingly wonderful paintings is the most glorious job in all the world. You get really close to a painting by a famous artist, and you can start to see how the artist actually was thinking. You get a feel for how the artist was creating these glorious works of art. It's just thrilling to look at the surface of these paintings in this way.